The blood on the flower petals wasn't supposed to be there. Alara Wynne stood frozen in the hallway of her apartment building, watching two men in expensive suits drag something heavy into 4B, the apartment of her mysterious neighbor, Dante Moretti. When one of them turned and locked eyes with her, she saw her own death reflected in his cold stare. But then Dante appeared in the doorway, his dark gaze finding hers across the dim corridor, and something shifted in the air between them. She didn't know it yet, but those small acts of kindness, the notes, the umbrella, the gentle gestures, had just sealed her fate in a world where mercy was a weakness and love could get you killed. If you're ready to discover how a shy florist's simple kindness pulled her into the dangerous world of the mafia, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The first time Alara Wynne noticed the man in 4B, it was through the silence. She'd lived in the Belmore apartments for 3 years, long enough to know the rhythm of the building. Mrs. Chen's television news at 6 o'clock, the Garcia twins thundering up the stairs after school, Mr. Patterson's jazz records bleeding through the walls every Sunday morning. But apartment 4B, directly across from her own 4A, existed in a pocket of absolute quiet that seemed to absorb sound rather than create it. She'd seen him exactly 4 times in the first 2 months, always alone, always in dark clothing that made him look like a shadow passing through the fluorescent hallway lights. Tall, broad-shouldered, with black hair, and the kind of face that made you look away not because it was ugly, but because it was too carefully blank, too deliberately unremarkable in its beauty. He never made eye contact, never acknowledged her presence even when they stood at their respective doors, keys in hand, separated by 12 feet of faded carpet. Most people would have found his coldness off-putting. Alara found it heartbreaking. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way he moved through the world like he was trying not to disturb it. Maybe it was the absolute absence of anything personal near his door. No welcome mat, no package deliveries, no signs that anyone cared whether he existed or not. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Alara had built her entire life around invisibility, around making herself small and unobtrusive, and she recognized a kindred spirit when she saw one. Even if this particular spirit looked like he could break her in half without breaking a sweat. "You're staring again," Mira said, nudging Alara with her elbow as they climbed the stairs together, grocery bags in hand. Mira lived on the 5th floor and had appointed herself Alara's unofficial best friend approximately 10 minutes after they'd met in the building's sad excuse for a laundry room. "I'm not staring," Alara protested, fumbling for her keys as they reached the 4th floor landing. "You are absolutely staring. You get this look on your face like you're trying to solve a particularly complicated puzzle." Mira shifted her bags to peer at 4B's door. "Though I'll admit, that man is definitely a puzzle. I've lived here for 5 years and I've never even heard him speak. What do you think he does?" "I don't know. Works nights, maybe? Or he's a vampire." Mira grinned. "That would explain the whole mysterious, deathly pale, never sees sunlight thing." Alara laughed despite herself. "He's not pale, and I've seen him during the day." "Oh, you've seen him during the day? How many times have you seen him, Alara?" "I'm not keeping count." "You're absolutely keeping count." They reached Alara's door and Mira set down her bags to give her a serious look. "Look, I'm all for you expanding your social circle beyond me and the flowers at that shop, but maybe start with someone who doesn't look like he murders people for a living?" The joke hit closer to truth than either of them knew. "I'm not trying to expand my social circle," Alara said, unlocking her door. I notice him, that's all." "You notice him the way a moth notices a flame right before it gets incinerated." "That's dramatic." "That's accurate." But Mira softened, reaching out to squeeze Alara's arm. "Just be careful, okay? I know you see the best in people, but some people don't have a best to see." After Mira left, Alara put away her groceries and tried not to think about the man across the hall. She made herself dinner, pasta, with the vegetables that were about to go bad, and settled on her threadbare couch with a book she'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks. But the words blurred on the page, and eventually she gave up, setting the book aside to stare at her small apartment. It wasn't much. A studio with a kitchenette that barely deserved the name, a bathroom where you could sit on the toilet and wash your hands in the sink simultaneously, and a main room that served as bedroom, living room, and dining room all at once. She'd tried to make it cozy, string lights across the ceiling, plants on every available surface. Her collection of secondhand books organized by color on the floating shelves she'd installed herself. But cozy couldn't disguise small, and small couldn't disguise alone. She'd been alone for so long now that she'd almost convinced herself she preferred it this way. After everything that had happened in her childhood, the raised voices, the broken promises, the eventual abandonment, solitude felt safer than connection. At least when you were alone, you controlled the silence. At least when you were alone, no one could decide you weren't worth staying for. Alara's gaze drifted to the window, to the city lights scattered across the darkness like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, people were living loud, messy, complicated lives. They were falling in love and breaking hearts, and making mistakes that would turn into stories they'd tell at parties. She was here, in her small apartment, living the quietest life she could manage. Except for one thing. Before she could talk herself out of it, Alara went to her small desk and pulled out a note card from the stationery set Mira had given her for her birthday. She chewed her lip, pen hovering over the paper, trying to decide what to write. Dear neighbor felt too formal. Hey felt too casual. To the man in 4B felt stalkerish. Finally, she just started writing. I noticed the fern in the hallway is looking a bit sad. I've been watering it on Wednesdays. If you'd rather I didn't, just let me know. Your neighbor in 4A, simple, harmless. A tiny bridge across the hallway that he could choose to walk across or ignore entirely. She slipped the note under his door before she could overthink it, her heart hammering like she'd just committed a crime. Nothing happened for 3 days. Alara went to work at Petal and Stem, the flower shop where she'd been employed for the past 4 years, and came home to her empty apartment. She watered the fern, a scrappy thing in a chipped pot that someone had abandoned in the hallway months ago, and tried not to look at 4B's door every time she passed it. On the 4th day, it rained. Not the gentle spring rain that brought out the worms and made everything smell like new growth, but a violent autumn storm that turned the streets into rivers and sent people scrambling for cover. Alara had forgotten her umbrella at work, and by the time she made it back to the Belmore, she was soaked through, her canvas shoes squelching with every step. She was digging for her keys, leaving puddles on the hallway carpet, when 4B's door opened. Alara froze. Dante Moretti stood in his doorway, and for the first time she got a clear look at him. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe early 30s, with sharp, angular features that looked carved rather than born, dark eyes that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it, a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked with scars she didn't want to think too hard about. He looked at her for exactly 3 seconds, 3 seconds during which Alara forgot how to breathe, and then he held out an umbrella. For next time, he said. His voice was deep, rough, like he didn't use it often. Alara stared at the umbrella. It was sleek, black, expensive looking, the kind of umbrella that cost more than her weekly grocery budget. I can't take that. You already did. He was still holding it out, his expression unchanged. You water the plant. It took her a moment to understand. He was trading the umbrella for the fern care, a transaction, not a gift, which somehow made it possible for her to take it. Thank you, she managed, accepting the umbrella with trembling hands. He nodded once and stepped back into his apartment. The door closed with a soft click, and Alara was alone in the hallway again, dripping onto the carpet, holding an umbrella that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She looked down at the fern. Its leaves seemed a little greener, a little more upright than they'd been a week ago. And despite the cold rain still clinging to her clothes, Alara smiled. The note started after that. Nothing dramatic, nothing that crossed lines, just small observations left under his door. The mailman delivered your package to my apartment by mistake. I left it by your door. There's a water leak in the hallway ceiling. I called the super. I saw a cat on the fire escape. I think it might be lost. I left food out just in case. He never responded in writing. But small things changed. The fern got a new pot. Still simple, but whole, without chips or cracks. Someone fixed the hallway light that had been flickering for months. Once she found a bag of cat food outside her door, with a note in sharp, efficient handwriting. For the fire escape cat. They were having a conversation, Alara realized. A strange, silent conversation conducted through actions instead of words. It should have felt insufficient. Most people would have wanted more. Actual words, actual interaction, actual proof that their existence registered with another human being. But Alara wasn't most people. She'd built her life around reading the things people didn't say, around finding meaning in gestures and silences. And in this particular silence, she found something that felt almost like companionship. Mira, of course, had opinions. "You're leaving notes for the murder vampire now?" she said, sprawled on Alara's couch while Ilara arranged a bouquet she'd brought home from the shop. The flowers too damaged to sell, but too beautiful to throw away. "He's not a murder vampire." "Has he spoken to you, like actual words?" "He gave me an umbrella." "Alara, honey, serial killers give people umbrellas. That's like manipulation 101. "You think everyone's a serial killer?" "I think people who don't talk to their neighbors are suspicious." Mira grabbed a piece of the pizza they were sharing. "What do you even know about this guy?" Alara trimmed the stem of a rose, considering. "I know he works unusual hours. I know he reads the newspaper but doesn't watch TV. I've never heard one through the wall. I know he drinks his coffee black because I've seen him throw away the cups. I know. Okay, you're either incredibly observant or incredibly stalkerish, and I'm not sure which is worse. I'm not stalking him, I just notice things." "You notice things about him." Mira gave her a long look. "Alara, when was the last time you went on a date?" "I don't date." "You don't date, you don't go out, you don't do anything except work and come home and water plants and leave notes for mysterious men who could absolutely be murderers." "Not everyone needs a loud life, Mira." "No, but everyone needs a life." Mira's voice gentled. "I just worry about you. You're so busy taking care of everyone else, the plants, the stray cats, the murder vampire's mail, that you forget to take care of yourself." "I'm fine." "You're lonely." The word hung in the air between them. Alara focused on the flowers, on the precise angle of each stem, on anything but the truth of what Mira had just said. "I'm not lonely," she finally said. "I'm just quiet." But late that night, after Mira had gone home, and the apartment settled into its familiar silence, Alara stood at her window and wondered if maybe Mira was right. Maybe there was a difference between choosing solitude and hiding from the world. Maybe all these small gestures, the notes, the watering, the careful maintenance of plants and stray cats and anything that needed tending, maybe they were just ways of reaching out without risking actual connection. Maybe she was just as alone as the man across the hall. She didn't leave a note the next day or the day after that. She told herself she was being sensible, that Mira's warning had sunk in, that getting emotionally invested in a neighbor's well-being was the first step toward something unhealthy. But on the third day, she came home to find something outside her door. A plant. A small succulent in a blue ceramic pot, the kind that didn't need much care but would thrive under attention. And underneath it, a note in that same sharp handwriting, "Thank you for the fern." 4B Lara stood in the hallway, holding the succulent, and felt something crack open in her chest. It wasn't love. She wasn't naive enough to call it that. But it was connection, real and undeniable. Proof that her small gestures had mattered to someone. Proof that she'd been seen. She was still standing there, smiling down at the plant like an idiot, when the elevator dinged and two men stepped out. They were wrong immediately. Wrong in a way that set off every alarm bell Alara had spent her life learning to trust. Too well dressed for this building. Too alert, their eyes scanning the hallway like they were looking for something specific. When they spotted her, they smiled. And it was the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. "Excuse me, miss," the taller one said, approaching with that casual confidence that came from never being told no. "We're looking for apartment 4B. You know the guy who lives there?" Every instinct Alara had screamed at her to lie. I don't really know my neighbors." "Really?" The second man tilted his head, studying her with cold interest. "Because we heard there's a girl on this floor who's been real friendly with him, leaving notes, taking care of his mail. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Alara's heart slammed against her ribs. The succulent suddenly felt heavy in her hands, like evidence of a crime she hadn't known she was committing. "I think you have the wrong person," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I mostly keep to myself. The men exchanged a look. The taller one reached into his jacket, and Alara's whole body went rigid, but he only pulled out a business card. If you remember anything, he said, pressing it into her hand, you give us a call. We're old friends of his, just trying to reconnect. They left, but their presence lingered in the hallway like smoke. Alara looked down at the card. No name, just a phone number in black ink. She should have thrown it away. Should have forgotten about it. Should have walked into her apartment, locked the door, and pretended the encounter had never happened. Instead, she knocked on 4B's door. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time, her fear giving way to something sharper. I know you're in there, she said to the closed door. 2 men were just here asking about you. They knew about the notes. They knew about me. The door opened so fast she stumbled back. Dante stood there, and for the first time since she'd met him, his carefully blank expression had cracked. He looked furious, not at her, but at something beyond her, something she couldn't see. Inside, he said, now. Alara should have run, should have screamed, should have done anything except what she did, which was step across the threshold into Dante Moretti's apartment, letting the door close behind her with the finality of a trap snapping shut. His apartment was nothing like she'd imagined. She'd pictured sparse, cold, empty, a reflection of the man himself. Instead, she found herself in a space that was almost warm. Hardwood floors covered in expensive rugs, leather furniture that looked actually comfortable, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves packed with everything from philosophy to crime novels. And on every available surface, the coffee table, the kitchen counter, the windowsill, her notes. Every single note she'd ever left him, arranged in chronological order like some kind of archive. You kept them, she whispered. Did they touch you? Dante asked, ignoring her observation entirely. The men. Did they threaten you? No, they asked about you. They said they were old friends. I don't have friends. He moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the street below. What did you tell them? Nothing. I said I didn't know my neighbors. He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. Did they believe you? I don't know. Dante swore under his breath, running a hand through his hair. It was the most agitated she'd ever seen him, and somehow that scared her more than the men in the hallway had. You need to stay away from me, he said finally. No more notes, no more plants. If you see me in the hallway, you don't acknowledge me. Understand? No. The word came out before Alara could stop it. No, I don't understand. Who were those men? Why were they asking about me? What did I do? You didn't do anything. His voice was rough. That's the problem. You're innocent, and that makes you a target. A target for what? He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him calculating, weighing options, deciding how much truth she could handle. I'm not who you think I am, he said finally. The quiet neighbor, the guy who keeps to himself, that's not the real me. That's just what I do here, in this building, because this is the one place I can pretend to be normal. Then who are you really? Someone dangerous. Someone you should be afraid of. I'm not afraid of you. You should be. But he sounded sad saying it, like he wished things could be different. Those men? They work for people who want to hurt me, and they think you matter to me. They think you're a weakness. Am I? The question came out quieter than she'd intended. Do I matter to you? Dante's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might lie, might push her away with cold words and colder eyes. But then he crossed to the coffee table and picked up one of her notes, the very first one, about the fern. I've lived in this building for 2 years, he said, not looking at her. In that time, you're the only person who's ever noticed I exist. Not the real me, the dangerous one. Just the man across the hall who waters plants and doesn't talk much. He set the note down carefully, like it was precious. So yes, you matter. And that's why you need to disappear from my life before someone uses you to destroy me. Alara's mind was reeling. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was everything she'd spent her life trying to avoid. Loud, messy, complicated. But when she looked at Dante, at this man who'd kept every silly note she'd written, who'd given her an umbrella and bought food for a stray cat and fixed hallway lights, all she could think was that Mira had been wrong. Some people's best wasn't easy to see. Sometimes you had to look for it in silences and small gestures. Sometimes you had to notice it in the things they tried to hide. What if I don't want to disappear? She heard herself say. Dante's head snapped up. Ilara, you know my name. Of course I know your name. I know you work at Petal and Stem. I know you take the long way home on Thursdays because the farmer's market is on your route. I know you stop to pet every dog you see and you save your coffee grounds for Mrs. Chen's tomato plants. I know everything about you because paying attention to the people around me is how I stay alive, and you— He stopped himself, but the damage was done. And me what? Ilara pressed. You're the one person I couldn't stop paying attention to even when I should have. The confession hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Tell me what to do, Ilara said. Tell me how to help. You can't help. You can only stay away. But those men already know about me. They suspect. They don't know for sure. If you cut contact now, they'll lose interest. And if I don't? Dante moved closer, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes. The part of him that wanted to protect her fighting with the part that wanted to keep her close. If you don't, he said quietly, then I have to take you somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't reach you. But that means leaving everything behind. Your job, your friends, your life. It means trusting me completely, even though you have no reason to. And it means accepting that the man who kept your notes and fixed your hallway lights is the same man who's done things that would make you run screaming if you knew the truth. Ilara thought about her small apartment, her quiet life, her carefully maintained solitude. She thought about Mira's warnings and common sense, and all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Then she thought about the fern in the hallway, growing greener under shared care. She thought about notes kept like treasures and umbrellas offered in rain, and all the small ways they'd been building something together without either of them admitting it. How long do I have to decide? She asked. Hours? Maybe less. Dante's phone buzzed, and his face darkened as he checked it. They're watching the building. If you leave alone, they'll follow you. If you leave with me— He trailed off, but the implication was clear. If she left with him, there was no going back. Ilara looked around the apartment one more time, at the notes, the books, the careful evidence of a man trying to be human in whatever moments he could steal. Then she looked at Dante himself, at this dangerous, lonely man who'd somehow become the most important person in her quiet life. I need to pack, she said. Dante's eyes widened. Ilara, you don't understand what you're— I understand perfectly. She was surprised by how calm she sounded. I understand that I've spent my whole life choosing safety over connection. I understand that those men already made me a target just for being kind to you. And I understand that I'd rather take my chances with the devil I've been leaving notes for than spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to cross the hallway. For the first time since she'd met him, Dante Moretti smiled. It was small, barely there, but it transformed his entire face. You have 20 minutes, he said. Pack light, no phone, no electronics, nothing they can trace. Ilara nodded and turned toward the door, then stopped. Dante? Yeah? When this is over, when it's safe, will you tell me your real story? Not the quiet neighbor version. The truth. He looked at her for a long moment. If you still want to know it when this is over, yes. I'll tell you everything. It wasn't a promise of safety. It wasn't even a promise of survival. But it was honest, and somehow that was enough. Ilara went back to her apartment and packed a bag with shaking hands. Clothes, toiletries, the succulent he'd given her because leaving it felt like leaving part of him behind. She wrote a note for Mira. Had to leave town for a family emergency. I'll call when I can, and knew her friend would see right through the lie, but wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Then she took one last look at her small, safe life and walked across the hallway. Dante was waiting, a go-bag already slung over his shoulder. He took her overnight bag without a word and led her to the fire escape instead of the elevator. They're watching the front, he explained quietly. We go down the back, through the basement, out through the old delivery entrance. My car is 2 blocks away. You had this planned. I always have an exit strategy. He paused on the fire escape landing, looking back at her. Last chance, Ilara. You can still walk away. She thought about the blood on the flower petals she'd seen in her opening vision, about danger and darkness, and all the reasons this was insane. Then she thought about a man who kept notes like treasures and cared for ferns in empty hallways. I'm not walking away, she said. Not from you. Something fierce and possessive flashed in Dante's eyes. Then stay close and do exactly what I say. Can you do that? Yes. They descended into the darkness together, leaving behind the life Alara had built from silence and safety. She didn't know what waited for her in Dante's world. Didn't know if she'd survive it, didn't know if she'd be able to reconcile the man she'd been leaving notes for with the man who lived in shadows and violence. But as they emerged into the cold night air and Dante's hand found hers, warm and solid and real, Alara realized something that should have terrified her. For the first time in her carefully quiet life, she felt completely, dangerously, beautifully alive. The car was a black sedan, nondescript and forgettable, parked exactly where Dante said it would be. He moved with practiced efficiency, checking the undercarriage with a flashlight before opening the passenger door for Alara. The gesture was so unexpectedly courteous that she almost laughed. Here was a man who checked for car bombs, treating her like she was fragile. "Get in and stay down until we're out of the city," he said, his voice all business now. The vulnerable man who'd shown her his collection of notes had disappeared, replaced by someone harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. Alara slid into the passenger seat and Dante closed the door with a soft click that sounded like a cell locking. Within seconds, he was behind the wheel, the engine purring to life with barely a whisper. They pulled away from the curb smoothly. Just another car in the late-night traffic, nothing to draw attention. "Where are we going?" Alara asked, her voice small in the enclosed space. "Somewhere they won't think to look." Dante's eyes never stopped moving, checking mirrors, scanning intersections, reading the street like it was a language only he understood. "There's a safe house about 2 hours north. We'll stay there tonight, figure out next steps in the morning." Next steps to what? To keeping you alive. The bluntness of it hit her like cold water. This was real. Those men in the hallway, the hasty escape, the car that Dante checked for explosives, this wasn't some romantic adventure. This was survival. "Tell me about them," Alara said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "The men who came to the apartment. Who are they? What do they want?" Dante was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. They merged onto the highway, the city lights falling away behind them, before he finally spoke. "They're associates of a man named Victor Castellano. He runs one of the other families in the city." He glanced at her, gauging her reaction. "You know what I mean when I say families, right? The mafia." It should have sounded ridiculous saying it out loud, like something from a movie. But the weight in Dante's expression told her this was anything but fiction. "Yeah, the mafia." He said it without drama, just a statement of fact. "Castellano thinks I'm moving in on his territory. He's wrong, but he's not interested in facts. He's interested in sending a message. By hurting me. By hurting anyone I might care about? Yes." Dante's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "There's a traitor in my organization, someone who's been feeding Castellano information about my movements, my routines. They told him about you." Alara thought about the men in the hallway, their two knowing smiles. They knew about the notes, about the plant watering, which means someone's been watching the building, watching us. His jaw clenched. "I should have seen it coming, should have been more careful." "This isn't your fault. It's entirely my fault." He shot her a look that was part frustration, part something darker. "You were innocent. You left some notes for a neighbor, watered a dying fern, and now you're running for your life because I was selfish enough to keep your attention when I should have shut you out completely." "Would that have changed anything? If you'd ignored the notes, I mean." Dante considered this. "Maybe. Maybe they would have written you off as just another neighbor, or maybe they would have hurt you anyway, just to see if I reacted." He merged into the left lane, still checking mirrors obsessively. "That's the thing about this world, Alara. Innocence doesn't protect you. Sometimes it makes you more of a target." They drove in silence for a while, the highway stretching dark and empty ahead of them. Alara watched the mile markers flash by and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. She'd left her apartment, her job, her entire life, to climb into a car with a man she barely knew. A man who'd just confirmed he was part of organized crime. She should have been terrified, should have been demanding he take her back, take her to the police, take her anywhere but deeper into this nightmare. Instead, she found herself asking, "How long have you been doing this? The mafia thing?" "My whole life." Dante's voice was matter of fact. "My father ran the Moretti family before me. his father before him. It's not something you choose. It's something you inherit, like brown eyes or a predisposition for heart disease. You could have walked away. No. Well, the word was absolute. I couldn't have. When you're born into this, you're born into it completely. There's no walking away, no clean exit. You either lead or you die. Those are the only options. Alara absorbed this, trying to reconcile the lonely man who'd kept her notes with the crime boss sitting beside her. What do you do? I mean, specifically. You sure you want to know? I'm in your car running from people who want to kill me. I think I deserve some honesty. Dante's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Fair enough. He took the exit ramp, heading onto a smaller highway that cut through dense forest. The Moretti family handles imports and exports, legitimate businesses on the surface, shipping companies, warehouses, distribution centers. Underneath, we move things that customs would rather not see. Drugs? Sometimes. Weapons, stolen goods, information. He said it without shame or pride, just cold recitation. We also provide protection to businesses in our territory, mediate disputes between other organizations, and maintain order in areas where the police don't bother going. Order. Alara repeated the word, tasting its bitter irony. Is that what you call it? I call it what it is, necessary structure in a world that runs on different rules than yours. He glanced at her. You think I'm a monster now, don't you? Did she? Alara looked at his profile in the dashboard lights, strong nose, sharp jaw, eyes that had seen too much. This was a man who'd admitted to trafficking illegal goods, who lived by violence and intimidation. Everything she'd been taught said she should recoil, should see him as the villain in this story. But she kept thinking about the notes, about the umbrella and the cat food and the fern in its new pot, about the way he'd kept every scrap of paper she'd left him, like they mattered, like she mattered. I think you're more complicated than monster, she said finally. Something shifted in Dante's expression, surprise, maybe, or relief. Most people aren't that generous. Most people didn't see you keep notes like love letters. They weren't love letters. Weren't they? Alara turned in her seat to face him properly. You kept every single one, Dante. You arranged them in order. You memorized my schedule, my habits, everything about me. That's not nothing. It's surveillance. It's caring. She said it gently, without accusation. You can call it whatever you want, but you cared. That's why those men targeted me. Not because they thought I was important to your business, but because they thought I was important to you. Dante's throat worked. This is why you should have stayed away from me. This right here. You see good where there isn't any. Or maybe you've convinced yourself you're worse than you are because it's easier than admitting you're human. Human. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Alara, I've killed people. Not in self-defense, not in the heat of the moment. Deliberately, methodically. I've hurt people to get what I want. I've destroyed families, ruined lives, made decisions that would give you nightmares. That's not being human. That's being a monster who happens to have a pulse. The confession should have horrified her, should have made her demand he stop the car, let her out, give her any escape from this rolling confession booth. But Alara had spent her whole life reading people, understanding what they didn't say, seeing the truth beneath the performance. And what she saw in Dante wasn't pride in his violence, it was disgust, self-loathing, the deep exhaustion of a man who'd been playing a role so long he'd almost forgotten there was anything underneath. Why did you keep the notes? She asked quietly. What? The notes. If you're this terrible person, this complete monster, why keep them? Why not throw them away? Dante didn't answer for a long time. They turned onto a narrow road, trees pressing close on either side, headlights cutting through absolute darkness. Finally, he said, because they were the only proof I had that someone could look at me and see anything worth caring about. The raw honesty of it stole her breath. Dante, we're here. He pulled up to a small cabin set back from the road, so hidden by trees it was almost invisible. No lights, no signs of life, just a structure that looked like it had been abandoned for years. But when Dante killed the engine and got out, he moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was. Alara followed him up the creaking porch steps, her overnight bag clutched in her hands like a talisman. Dante unlocked the door with a key from his pocket and gestured her inside. It's not much, he said, flipping a switch that brought weak light from a single overhead bulb. "But it's clean and it's off the grid. No one knows about this place except me." The cabin was sparse. One main room with a kitchenette, a bedroom visible through an open door, a bathroom barely bigger than a closet. But it was neat, dust-free, stocked with supplies like someone had been maintaining it regularly.
"You come here often?" Elara asked, setting her bag on the worn couch. "Sometimes, when I need to think." Dante locked the door behind them and engaged 2 additional deadbolts. "There's food in the pantry, clean water, everything you need. The bedroom's yours. I'll take the couch." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice was firm. "You're here because of me.
"The least I can do is let you have some privacy." Elara nodded, too exhausted to argue. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright was starting to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made her limbs feel heavy. "There's a phone in the bedroom," Dante continued. "Landline, untraceable. If something happens, if anyone comes here who isn't me, you call the number written on the wall beside it. They'll get you to safety." "What about you?" "I can take care of myself." "That's not what I asked." Dante looked at her, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes again. The part that wanted to maintain distance, fighting with the part that had kept her notes like treasures. "Get some sleep," he said instead of answering. "We'll talk more in the morning." Elara wanted to push, wanted to demand answers to all the questions spinning through her mind, but exhaustion won. She picked up her bag and headed to the bedroom, pausing in the doorway to look back at him. "Thank you," she said, "for protecting me." "Don't thank me yet." Dante's expression was unreadable. "This is far from over." The bedroom was small and plain, with a double bed covered in a faded quilt and a single window looking out into darkness. Elara set the succulent on the nightstand, the only personal item she'd brought, and changed into pajamas with shaking hands. Through the thin wall, she could hear Dante moving around the main room, the sound of water running, cabinet doors opening and closing. She should have been afraid, should have been planning her escape, figuring out how to get back to her normal life, her safe life, her carefully constructed solitude. Instead, she lay in the unfamiliar bed and thought about a man who'd killed people but kept notes like love letters. A man who'd pulled her into his dangerous world but was sleeping on a couch to give her privacy. A man who looked at her like she was simultaneously his salvation and his damnation. Elara must have dozed off because she woke to the sound of voices in the other room. Dante's voice, low and tense, and another voice she didn't recognize. She checked the clock on the nightstand, 3 in the morning. She'd been asleep for maybe 2 hours. Moving as quietly as she could, Elara crept to the bedroom door and pressed her ear against it. "Tracking software in her phone," the unfamiliar voice was saying. "They would have found her within hours." "Well, I told her no electronics," Dante replied. "She left everything." "Smart girl." A pause. "You sure about this, boss? Bringing a civilian into the mix?" "I didn't have a choice. They already made her a target. Could have put her in witness protection. Let the feds handle it." "And trust the same system that has a mole feeding information to Castellano? No, she stays with me until we find the traitor." "And after?" Silence. Then, after, she goes back to her life. Safe, untouched by any of this. "You believe that's possible?" "It has to be." Footsteps approached the door, and Elara scrambled back to bed, diving under the covers just as the door cracked open. Dante's silhouette filled the doorway, backlit by the weak light from the main room. He stood there for a long moment, just watching her pretend to sleep, and she wondered if he could tell she was faking. Finally, he pulled the door closed with a soft click. Elara lay in the darkness, processing what she'd overheard. Dante had a plan. He was going to find the traitor, neutralize the threat, and send her back to her normal life like none of this had ever happened. Like she could just forget about the man across the hall who'd kept her notes. Like she could go back to her quiet, careful existence and pretend she hadn't seen the desperate loneliness in his eyes. Like she could unlearn the truth that had been growing in her chest since the moment she'd stepped into his apartment. She didn't want to go back. Not to the silence, not to the safety, not to a life where she went through the motions but never truly felt anything. Morning came too quickly. Elara woke to the smell of coffee and found Dante in the kitchenette, dressed in dark jeans and a black Henley that made him look less like a crime boss
and more like someone who could have been a teacher or an architect in another life. "Sleep okay?" he asked, pouring her a cup without asking if she wanted one. "Well enough." Alara accepted the coffee gratefully. "I heard voices last night." Dante's expression didn't change. "Marco, one of my men. He brought supplies, checked in on the situation. He called me a civilian. You are a civilian. And you're planning to send me back to my life when this is over." Dante set down his coffee cup carefully. "You were listening." "The walls are thin." Alara held his gaze. "Is that really what you want? To send me away? What I want is irrelevant. What's safe for you is all that matters." "I'm not asking what's safe. I'm asking what you want." The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was quite ready to name. Dante looked away first, staring out the window at the morning gray forest. "I want you alive and whole and far away from the poison I carry," he said finally. "I want you to go back to your flowers and your quiet life and your small kindnesses that make the world less ugly. I want you to forget you ever left notes for the monster across the hall." That's a lot of wants for someone who says what he wants is irrelevant. Despite everything, Dante's lips twitched. "You're stubborn." "I'm honest." Alara moved to stand beside him at the window. "You keep trying to make yourself into this one-dimensional villain, but I've seen too much to believe it. The man who kept my notes isn't the same man who thinks he's beyond redemption. Maybe they're the same man. Maybe that's the problem. Or maybe you've been alone so long you've forgotten how to let anyone see you as human." Dante turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Then explain it to me. You promised you'd tell me the truth if I still wanted to know it." "That was before..." "Before what? Before I saw your apartment? Before I got in your car? Before I chose to trust you instead of running?" Alara set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. "I'm here, Dante. I'm in this, whether you like it or not. So stop trying to protect me from the truth and just tell me." For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then something in him seemed to crack, and he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. But don't say I didn't warn you." They sat on the worn couch, and Dante told her everything. He told her about growing up in a world where violence was currency and loyalty was the only virtue that mattered. About watching his father rule with an iron fist, admired and feared in equal measure. About learning at 12 years old that the family business wasn't import-export, but something far darker. About the first time he'd seen someone die. The first time he'd pulled a trigger himself. The way each act of violence chipped away another piece of his humanity until he wasn't sure what was left. He told her about inheriting the empire at 25 when his father had a heart attack. About the enemies who'd thought a young boss would be easy to overthrow. About the brutality he'd employed to prove them wrong. About the decisions he'd made that haunted him. The orders he'd given that he couldn't take back. The line between necessary evil and genuine monstrosity that he'd crossed so many times he'd stopped seeing it. And he told her about the loneliness. The absolute crushing isolation of living in a world where everyone either feared you or wanted something from you. Where trust was weakness and connection was leverage. And the closest thing to friendship was professional respect between people who'd kill each other under the right circumstances. "The apartment at the Belmore," he said, "that was supposed to be temporary. Just a place to lay low while we handled some complications with a rival family. But it was the first time in my adult life I'd lived somewhere normal. Somewhere people didn't know who I was. Somewhere I could pretend, even for a few hours, that I was just a guy with a job and a life and a future that didn't end in blood." "And then I started leaving notes," Alara said softly. "And then you started leaving notes." Dante's voice was rough. "The first one, about the fern, I almost threw it away. Thought it was some kind of setup. But then I watched you water that stupid plant, and you were so careful with it, so gentle, and I realized you were just kind. Genuinely, inexplicably kind, for no reason except that you saw something that needed care and you gave it. So you kept the note." "I kept the note. And then you left another one, and another, and each one was like proof, I guess. Proof that someone could look in my direction and not see a monster,
Just a neighbor who needed an umbrella or whose mail got misdelivered. He met her eyes. You have no idea what that felt like. To be seen as human, even by someone who didn't know the truth. Alara's throat was tight. And now I know the truth. Now you know the truth. Dante's expression was carefully neutral, braced for her rejection. So go ahead. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me you want to go home, that you made a mistake, that you can't look at me the same way knowing what I've done. She should have said exactly that, should have recoiled from the violence he'd described, the coldness with which he detailed his crimes, the casual way he accepted his own monstrosity. But all Alara could think about was the loneliness, the desperate, aching isolation of living in a world where no one saw you as human. She knew that feeling, had lived it herself in her own quiet way, building walls around her heart and calling it safety. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that you're right. I don't know your world. I don't understand the choices you've had to make or the violence you've lived with. But I do know loneliness. And I know what it's like to build your whole life around not being seen because being visible feels too dangerous. It's not the same. No, it's not. Your danger is real and physical. Mine was emotional. But the result is the same, isn't it? We're both hiding. We're both alone. We're both so used to protecting ourselves that we've forgotten what it feels like to be actually connected to another person. Dante stared at her. You're not alone. You have Mira, your job, your whole life. I have acquaintances and routines. That's not the same as connection. Alara leaned forward, needing him to understand. You kept my notes because they made you feel seen. I left those notes because taking care of that fern, leaving you small gestures of kindness, it was the closest I could get to connection without risking anything real. We're both lonely, Dante. We're just lonely in different ways. The silence that followed was profound. Outside, birds called to each other in the morning light, oblivious to the tension inside the cabin. What are you saying? Dante asked finally. I'm saying I don't want to go back. Not yet. Lara's heart was pounding, but she forced herself to keep going. I'm saying that yes, you're dangerous, and yes, you've done terrible things, but you're also the person who kept every note I ever wrote you. And maybe that matters more than it should, but it matters to me. Alara, I'm not asking for promises or forever or anything we can't deliver, she interrupted. I'm just asking to stay, to help you find this traitor, to see where this goes without running away because it's scary. Dante shook his head slowly. You have no idea what you're asking for. Then show me. The words came out as a challenge. Stop trying to protect me from yourself and just show me who you really are. All of it. The darkness and the violence and whatever else you think will make me run. Because I'm tired of living in safety, Dante. I'm tired of choosing invisibility over existence. Something dangerous flickered in Dante's eyes. Hope, maybe. Or hunger. Or both. If you stay, you follow my rules. You do exactly what I say when I say it. No questions, no hesitation. Your safety is non-negotiable. Agreed. And if I tell you to run, to leave, to save yourself, you do it. Even if it means leaving me behind. Those are the terms, Alara. Take them or go back to the city now. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wouldn't abandon him no matter what he ordered. But she could see the iron determination in his expression, the absolute refusal to bend on this point. If she wanted to stay, she had to give him this. Okay, she said. Okay, I promise. Dante searched her face, looking for cracks in her resolve. Whatever he found there must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. Then welcome to my world, he said. Try not to die in it. The plan, as Dante explained it over the next several hours, was both brilliant and terrifying in its simplicity. They would return to the city, but not to hiding. Instead, they would do the exact opposite. They would be visible, public, undeniably together. They would let Castellano's people see that Alara mattered to Dante, that she was his weakness, his vulnerability, his soft spot in an otherwise impenetrable armor. And then they would stage a breakup so brutal, so public, so devastating that no one would question its authenticity. The traitor is someone close to me, Dante said, spreading photographs across the cabin's small table. Someone who knows my routines, my properties, my people. Marco's been running background checks on everyone in my inner circle for the past month. We've narrowed it down to 3 possibilities. Alara studied the photographs. 3 men, all looking professional and dangerous in their own ways.
How do we figure out which one it is? We make you irresistible bait. Dante's jaw was tight. If they think you're important to me, they'll make a move. Try to use you against me, either by kidnapping you or by feeding information about you to Castellano. When they do, we'll have them. And the breakup? Happens after we identify the traitor, but before we move against them.
If Castellano thinks I've cut you loose, thinks you mean nothing to me anymore, he loses his leverage. You become irrelevant to his plans, which means you become safe. It made sense strategically. Emotionally, it felt like planning her own heartbreak. How long do we have to pretend? To be together, I mean. Dante looked at her, and something complicated passed through his expression. A week. Maybe 2. Long enough to be convincing, but not so long that it becomes complicated. Too late for that, Elara thought, but she kept the observation to herself. What does being together look like, in practical terms? Dinners at places my people frequent, public appearances. You moving into my penthouse downtown. He said it matter-of-factly, but she caught the tension in his shoulders. We need to sell this completely. Half measures won't work. So we're dating, publicly, for the world to see. We're acting like we're dating. There's a difference. Is there? The question came out softer than she'd intended, because the truth was, the line between performance and reality was already blurring for her. Every moment she spent with Dante, every piece of his story he shared, every glimpse of the lonely man beneath the monster's mask, made it harder to remember this was supposed to be strategy. Dante's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. There has to be. They drove back to the city that afternoon, and Elara watched the landscape transform from forest to suburbs to urban sprawl, with a strange sense of unreality. Just 3 days ago, she'd been living her quiet life, her biggest concern whether she'd remembered to order more ribbon for the flower shop. Now she was returning as the supposed girlfriend of a mafia boss, bait in a trap designed to catch a traitor. The penthouse was nothing like the apartment at the Belmore. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, expensive furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, art on the walls that Elara suspected was worth more than she'd earned in her entire life. It was beautiful and cold and utterly impersonal, like a hotel room for someone who'd never learned how to make a home. The bedroom on the right is yours, Dante said, setting down her bag. Private bathroom, walk-in closet. Marco's wife sent over some clothes for you, things appropriate for the places we'll be going. If anything doesn't fit, let me know. Elara wandered to the windows, looking out at the city spread below them like scattered diamonds. Do you actually live here? Sometimes, when I need to be downtown for business. He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his body heat. Most of the time I stay at the Belmore. Because you can pretend to be normal there. Because I can pretend to be human there, shut. He corrected quietly. There's a difference. Before Elara could respond, Dante's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. We have a dinner reservation tonight, 8 o'clock at Aurelio's. It's a restaurant my people use for meetings. Everyone who needs to see us together will be there. That's fast. The faster we move, the faster this ends. He looked at her, and she saw something that might have been regret in his eyes. You can still back out, Elara. I can have Marco take you somewhere safe, somewhere far from all of this. She should have said yes, should have taken the escape route he was offering. Instead, she thought about going back to her small apartment, her quiet life, her carefully maintained loneliness, and the prospect felt suffocating. I'm not backing out, she said. I made a choice. I'm staying. Something fierce flashed in Dante's expression, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. Then you should start getting ready. We leave in 3 hours. The dress Marco's wife had sent was midnight blue, simple but elegant, cut to skim rather than cling. Elara stared at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She'd pulled her hair up, applied makeup with a hand that only trembled slightly, put on heels that made her 3 inches taller and considerably less stable. She looked like someone who belonged in Dante's world. Someone confident and put together and entirely unlike the shy florist who left notes for her neighbor. When she emerged from the bedroom, Dante was waiting in the living room, and the look on his face when he saw her made her breath catch. He'd changed into a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and made him look every inch the dangerous man he was. But it was the way he looked at her,
like she'd stolen the air from his lungs, that made her pulse race.
You look... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. You look perfect. They'll believe it. They, not we. The reminder that this was performance stung more than it should have. The restaurant was exactly what Ilara expected. Old-world elegance, dim lighting, the kind of place where conversations happened in low voices and everyone noticed who came and went. Dante placed his hand on the small of her back as they entered, a possessive gesture that sent heat radiating through her entire body. Smile, he murmured against her ear. You're supposed to be happy to be here. She was happy to be here, but not for the reasons anyone would think. Not because of the expensive restaurant, or the designer dress, or the arm of the most dangerous man in the city. She was happy because for the first time in years, she felt seen. Real. Like she existed in the world instead of just moving through it. They were shown to a private table in the back, and Ilara noticed the way people watched them. Subtle glances, calculated assessments, the kind of attention that came with being associated with power. Dante ordered wine without consulting her, his hand finding hers on the table, thumb stroking over her knuckles in a gesture that looked intimate but felt strategic. The man at the bar, he said quietly, never taking his eyes off her face. Dark suit, silver tie. That's Vincent Marchetti, one of our 3 suspects. He's been with the family for 15 years, runs our operations on the east side. Ilara resisted the urge to look. What makes you suspect him? He's been asking questions about my schedule. Small things, but enough to notice. And he's been making deposits to an offshore account that don't match his legitimate salary. Dante's thumb continued its maddening stroke across her skin. Could be legitimate side income. Could be payments from Castellano. The other 2 suspects? Anthony Russo, my head of security. He's here too, 3 tables to our left. And James Chen, my financial advisor. He'll probably show up later. He always does when he hears I'm here. The waiter brought their wine, and Dante raised his glass to her. To new beginnings, he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Ilara clinked her glass against his, playing her part. To taking chances. His eyes darkened at that, and for a moment she wondered if he was still acting. Dinner was a strange dance of public performance and private tension. Dante ordered for both of them, anticipating her preferences with an accuracy that suggested he'd been paying closer attention than she'd realized. Between courses, men approached their table, associates offering greetings, rivals assessing the new variable in Dante's life, allies making sure their boss was happy. Each time, Dante introduced her simply as Ilara, his hand never leaving hers, his body language screaming possession without saying a word. You're good at this, she murmured during a brief moment of privacy. At what? Acting like you care about me. Dante's expression went carefully blank. Who says I'm acting? The question hung between them, dangerous and electric. Before Ilara could respond, a new man approached their table, tall, handsome, with the kind of smooth charm that immediately set her on edge. Dante, the man said warmly, I heard you were here, wanted to pay my respects. Victor, Dante's voice was cold as winter. I'm surprised to see you on this side of town. Victor Castellano. Ilara recognized the name from their earlier conversation. The rival boss, the man whose associates had come to her building looking for leverage. He smiled at her like they were old friends. And who is this lovely creature? He asked, his gaze sliding over her in a way that made her skin crawl. No one you need to know about, Dante said, his grip on Ilara's hand tightening protectively. Come now, Dante. We're all friends here. Castellano pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. I'm Victor Castellano, and you are? Leaving, Ilara said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. We were just finishing our meal. Castellano's smile widened. Spirit. I like that. Tell me, what's a woman like you doing with a man like Dante? Don't you know what he is? I know exactly what he is. Ilara met his eyes steadily, channeling every ounce of courage she possessed. The question is, do you know what I am? Something flickered in Castellano's expression. Respect, maybe, or calculation. Enlighten me. Someone who doesn't appreciate interruptions during dinner. She stood, and Dante rose with her, his hand moving to the small of her back. It was nice meeting you, Mr. Castellano. I hope we don't have to do it again.
They left the restaurant with Dante radiating tension like a live wire. He handed the valet his ticket, then turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," he said. "Maybe both." Alara was shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Was that okay? I didn't blow the plan, did I?" Dante pulled her close, his arms coming around her in a gesture that felt less like performance and more like relief. "You were perfect," he murmured against her hair. "Absolutely perfect." The valet brought the car, and they drove back to the penthouse in charged silence. Alara kept replaying the evening in her mind, the weight of Dante's hand on hers, the way he'd looked at her across the dinner table, the protective fury in his eyes when Castellano had approached. How much of it had been real? How much had been for show? "That thing you said to Castellano," Dante said as they rode the elevator up to the penthouse. "About knowing what I am, did you mean it?" "Which part?" "That you know, that you understand what I am and you're here anyway." Alara looked at him, at this dangerous, lonely man who'd kept her notes like treasures. "Yes, I meant it." The elevator doors opened and Dante ushered her into the penthouse. But instead of heading to his own room, he poured them both a drink, something amber and expensive that burned going down. "I need to tell you something," he said, handing her the glass. "About the plan." Dread curled in Alara's stomach. "What about it?" "The breakup. When we stage it." Dante set down his glass with careful precision. "It has to be brutal, public, the kind of thing that leaves no doubt that you mean nothing to me anymore." "I understand." "I don't think you do." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture betraying his agitation. "I'm going to say things to you, Alara. Terrible things. Things designed to humiliate you, to make you look weak, to convince everyone watching that you are nothing but a temporary distraction. Dante, and you have to sell it. You have to look devastated, heartbroken, destroyed. Because if Castellano suspects for even a second that we're still connected, that I still care what happens to you, you'll never be safe." The reality of what he was describing hit her like cold water. "When?" "Soon. Marco thinks he's close to identifying the traitor. Once we know who it is, we move." He looked at her with something that might have been pain. "I need to know you can do this. That you can stand in front of me while I tear you apart and not break character." Could she? Could she stand there while Dante said terrible things, while he rejected her publicly, while he confirmed every fear she'd ever had about not being worth keeping? "I can do it," she heard herself say. "Whatever you need me to do. Even if it destroys whatever this is between us." There it was. The acknowledgement that there was something between them, something beyond strategy and survival. Alara set down her glass and moved closer to him, close enough to see the war in his dark eyes. "What is this between us, Dante?" "I don't know." His voice was rough. "I don't know what to call it or how to name it or whether it's even real. All I know is that I kept your notes because they made me feel human. And now you're here, in my world, in my home, and every moment I spend with you makes it harder to remember why I'm supposed to let you go." Alara's breath caught. "Then don't let me go." "I have to. For your safety, I have to." He reached up, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything he was. "But before I do, before we stage that breakup and end whatever this is, I need you to know something." "What?" "That if I were a different man in a different life, I would keep you. I would keep every note, every smile, every moment of kindness you ever showed me, and I would build something real around them. Something that didn't involve danger or deception, or plans that require me to break your heart to keep you safe." Tears burned in Alara's eyes. "Dante." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative or questioning. It was desperate and hungry and absolutely real, his hands tangling in her hair, her body pressed against his like she could somehow get closer than physics allowed. This was the man beneath the mask, the lonely soul who'd kept her notes, the human being who'd been pretending to be a monster for so long he'd almost believed it himself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "That wasn't part of the plan," he said roughly. "I know. We shouldn't. I know. But I can't." He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense.
I can't pretend anymore that this is just strategy, that you're just bait, that I'm just protecting an innocent civilian. Then don't pretend, Alara's hands fisted in his shirt. Just for tonight, don't pretend. Be whoever you actually are, and I'll do the same, and we'll deal with the consequences tomorrow. She saw the moment he decided to stop fighting, saw the walls come down, the careful control slip away. The monster mask finally cracked to reveal the man underneath. And when he kissed her again, leading her toward his bedroom instead of hers, Alara knew she was crossing a line she couldn't uncross. But she'd been living her whole life on the safe side of lines, and look where it had gotten her. Alone. Invisible. Untouched by anything real or dangerous or worth remembering. Dante was dangerous. Dante was impossible. Dante was everything she shouldn't want. But he was also the man who'd kept her notes like love letters, who'd pulled her into his world to protect her, who looked at her like she was something precious in a life that had taught him nothing was sacred. So she crossed the line. She let him pull her into his bedroom, into his bed, into his arms with a fierceness that felt like falling and flying simultaneously. And in the darkness of the penthouse, with the city lights scattered below them like fallen stars, Alara and Dante stopped pretending. They had until morning to be real, until the plan resumed and the performance continued, and they had to remember why being together was the most dangerous thing either of them could do. But for these stolen hours, they were just two lonely people who'd found each other across a hallway and refused to let go, even though holding on might destroy them both. The morning came too soon, reality reasserting itself with the harsh light of day. Alara woke in Dante's arms, his body warm against hers, and for a moment let herself pretend this was normal, that she woke up like this every day, that the man holding her was just a man, and she was just a woman, and love was simple instead of impossible. Then Dante's phone buzzed, shattering the illusion. He reached for it, careful not to disturb her, but Alara was already awake. She watched his expression change as he read the message, from resigned contentment to sharp alertness. "What is it?" she asked. "Marco." He found something. Dante sat up, already shifting back into the crime boss she'd first glimpsed in the hallway of the Belmore. "We need to meet him. Now." They dressed quickly, the intimacy of the night before giving way to the cold reality of what they were actually doing. Dante handed her coffee, kissed her forehead with a tenderness that made her chest ache, and led her down to the car. Marco was waiting at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, his expression grim. He nodded to Alara but directed his words to Dante. "It's Russo," he said without preamble. "Anthony Russo, your head of security." Dante's face went completely blank, which Alara had learned meant he was feeling too much to show any of it. "You're certain?" "Intercepted communications. Bank transfers. He's been feeding Castellano information for the past 6 months." Marco pulled out a tablet, showing them evidence that looked damning even to Alara's untrained eye. "He's the one who told them about her, about the notes, the building, everything." "Where is he now?" "Your penthouse." "He doesn't know we know. He's waiting for your call about tonight's security detail." Dante was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he turned to Alara, and the look in his eyes was absolutely cold. "Change of plans. We move now. Today." "The breakup?" she asked, her stomach dropping. "The breakup." He cupped her face, and despite everything, his touch was gentle. "I'm sorry. I know we thought we'd have more time, but if Russo knows we're on to him, he'll bolt. We need to neutralize him first, and that means making Castellano think you're worthless to me immediately." "Where?" "Your flower shop. Public, emotional, witnessed by people who'll spread the story." Dante's thumb stroked over her cheekbone. "I need you to trust me. What I'm about to do, what I'm about to say, none of it is real. Do you understand?" Alara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Say it. Tell me you understand." "I understand. None of it is real." But even as she said the words, she wondered if she believed them. If the cruel things he was about to say might not have some kernel of truth to them. That she'd been foolish to think a mafia boss could want someone like her. That last night had been pity or strategy or anything except what it had felt like in the moment. Dante seemed to read her thoughts. "Alara, look at me." When she met his eyes, she saw something fierce and desperate there. "Every terrible thing I'm about to say is a lie. Every word designed to push you away is the opposite of what I want. Remember that. No matter what happens, remember that." Then he kissed her, hard and possessive and absolutely real, before pulling away and transforming back into the cold, dangerous man the world expected him to be. The flower shop looked exactly as Alara had left it. The same cheerful window display, the same faded awning, the same bell that chimed when they walked through the door. Her coworker, Sarah, looked up in surprise. "Alara? Oh my gosh, are you okay? You just disappeared and Mira said something about a family emergency and—" She stopped, noticing Dante. "Who's this?" "We need the shop," Dante said, his voice allowing no argument. "Close it, now." Sarah looked at Alara, confused and a little frightened. Alara forced a smile. "It's okay, Sarah, just close up and take an early lunch. I'll explain everything later." After Sarah left, casting worried glances over her shoulder, Dante pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Russo, telling him to spread the word that I'm here, that I'm handling a personal matter. He'll make sure the right people hear about it, people who'll tell Castellano. And then I break your heart in front of anyone who walks by." He looked at her, and she saw the pain in his eyes even as his expression remained cold. "Are you ready?" She wasn't. She would never be ready, but she nodded anyway. Dante made the call, his voice clipped and professional. Then he turned back to her, and Alara watched the last traces of warmth leave his expression. This was the monster everyone feared. The man without mercy or softness or any of the qualities that had made her fall for him. "Let's get this over with," he said. The words started cruel and got worse. "Did you actually think this was real?" Dante's voice cut through the flower shop like a blade, loud enough for the people gathering outside the window to hear. "Did you honestly believe I could want someone like you?" Alara stood frozen between the counter and a display of roses, watching this man she'd given herself to transform into someone she didn't recognize. His face was twisted with contempt, his eyes cold as winter, and even though she knew it was performance, the words still landed like blows. "Dante, please." She made her voice small, broken, playing the part he needed her to play. "Please what? Please pretend for a few more days that you're anything more than a distraction?" He laughed, and the sound was cruel. "You were convenient, Alara, a naive little florist who looked at me like I was human. Do you know how rare that is? How easy it was to use?" Through the window, she could see shadows gathering. People stopping on the sidewalk, phones out, capturing every moment. This was working exactly as planned. The breakup would be documented, shared, spread through the networks that fed information to Castellano. By tonight, everyone would know that Dante Moretti had discarded the woman they'd thought mattered to him. "I trusted you." Alara let tears gather in her eyes, not entirely manufactured, because even though she knew this was strategy, even though he'd warned her, the cruelty still hurt. "You said you kept my notes. You said they mattered." "They were paper, Alara. Just paper." Dante moved closer, his presence dominating the small space. "Did you really think some silly notes about ferns and umbrellas meant something to me? I kept them because they were useful. Because I knew eventually I might need someone innocent and trusting, and you'd already proven you were both." Someone outside gasped. Alara recognized Mrs. Chen from her building, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. Perfect. The story would spread through the Belmore by evening, confirming that the quiet neighbor in 4B was exactly the monster everyone suspected. "You're lying," Alara forced her voice to shake. "Last night, you said—" "Last night I said what you needed to hear to keep you compliant." Dante's expression was absolutely flat. "You think you're the first woman I've manipulated? The first one to mistake strategy for affection?" He picked up a vase of lilies, examined it with cold disinterest, then set it down hard enough to make the water slosh. "You were a job, Alara, a way to draw out a traitor, and now that you've served your purpose, I'm done with you." The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision. Every word calculated to wound, every gesture designed to humiliate. Alara knew she should feel relief. This was working. The plan was succeeding. Soon she'd be safe from Castellano's interest. But all she could feel was the terrible weight of those words, the way they echoed every fear she'd ever had about not being worth keeping. "Get out." She said it quietly at first, then louder. "Get out of my shop." "Gladly." Dante headed for the door, then turned back. "One more thing. Those notes you left?
I burned them this morning, every single one. They were cluttering up space I needed for things that actually matter. He left without looking back, the bell chiming cheerfully above the door, utterly oblivious to the destruction it had just witnessed. Through the window, Elara watched him climb into his car and drive away, and she let herself collapse against the counter, shaking with real tears now. The performance was over. The breakup was complete. And even though she knew it was fake, even though Dante had warned her, even though every terrible word had been a lie, Elara felt like something essential inside her had cracked. Sarah came running in moments later, her lunch clearly abandoned. "Oh, honey, oh no, what happened? Who was that man? Are you okay?" Elara let herself be held, let Sarah make sympathetic sounds, let the story spread exactly as they'd planned. The shy florist and the cruel stranger, the innocent girl who'd been used and discarded, the cautionary tale that would be repeated in hushed voices for weeks. By the time Mira arrived, breathless and furious, Elara had composed herself enough to send Sarah home and lock the shop door. Mira took one look at her and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Mrs. Chen called me. Said some bastard just destroyed you in the middle of your own shop." Mira pulled back, studying Elara's face. "Please tell me this wasn't the murder vampire." "Don't call him that." "Elara, please tell me you didn't—" Mira stopped, seeing the truth on her face. "Oh no, oh honey, no. What did you do?" "I fell for him." The admission came out broken. "I knew better. You warned me. Everyone warned me, but I fell for him anyway. And he used me." It was the story they'd crafted, the narrative that would keep her safe. But saying it out loud, giving voice to the terrible possibility that maybe some of it was true, made Elara feel sick. Mira held her while she cried, murmuring comforting things. And Elara hated herself for the deception, hated that she was lying to the one real friend she had, hated that the line between performance and reality had blurred so completely she didn't know where one ended and the other began. "You're staying with me tonight," Mira declared. "No arguments. You're not going back to that apartment where you'll just sit and think about him. You're coming to my place. We're ordering terrible food, and we're watching movies where men get what they deserve." Elara wanted to refuse, to go back to the penthouse where Dante was waiting to tell her the plan had worked, that she was safe now, that none of it was real. But that would break character. The devastated ex-girlfriend didn't run back to the man who destroyed her. She accepted comfort from her friends and tried to put the pieces of her life back together. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." At Mira's apartment, Elara checked her phone obsessively, waiting for word from Dante. But the hours passed with no message, no call, nothing to indicate that the breakup had been anything other than exactly what it appeared to be. "He's not worth it," Mira said, noticing her checking. "Any man who would say those things, in public like that, he's garbage. You're better off without him." "I know." Elara set the phone down, face down, trying to silence the desperate part of her that wanted to defend him. That wanted to explain he'd been protecting her, that every cruel word had been armor against a world that would destroy her if they thought she mattered. But she couldn't explain. Not without exposing the truth. Not without putting Mira in danger too. So she sat on Mira's couch, eating takeout she couldn't taste, watching movies she couldn't follow, and tried not to think about Dante's hands in her hair, his mouth on hers. The way he'd looked at her in the darkness and said if he were a different man in a different life, he would keep her. Her phone finally buzzed around midnight. Mira had fallen asleep during the second movie, exhausted by her efforts to cheer Elara up. Elara grabbed the phone with shaking hands. Not Dante. Marco. The message was brief. "It's done. Russo's been handled. You're safe now. Boss says to stay away from the penthouse for a few days. Let things cool down. He'll contact you when it's clear." Elara stared at the message, reading it over and over. Russo was handled. She was safe. The plan had worked, so why did she feel like she'd lost something irretrievable? She deleted the message and set the phone aside, curling into the corner of Mira's couch. Through the window, she could see the city lights, the same view she'd had from Dante's penthouse, but completely different from this angle. Everything looked different now. She'd crossed into his world, touched something real and dangerous and absolutely impossible, and now she was back on the outside looking in. The days that followed were strange and hollow. Elara went back to work at the flower shop,
enduring pitying looks from Sarah and customers who'd heard about the public breakup. She returned to her apartment at the Belmore, walking past 4B without looking, without pausing, without leaving any notes for the man who wasn't there anymore. Because Dante wasn't there. His apartment stood empty, silent, the fern in the hallway slowly dying from neglect. Mrs. Chen asked about him once, and Alara just shook her head, unable to explain that the quiet neighbor who'd lived across from her was gone, replaced by or revealed to be someone else entirely. A week passed. Then two. Marco's message had said a few days, but the silence stretched longer with each sunset. Alara started to wonder if maybe the breakup had been more real than she'd thought. If Dante had meant some of those cruel things, if the plan had been to cut her loose completely, to send her back to her safe, quiet life and pretend none of it had ever happened. She tried to return to her routines. Water the plants, go to work, smile at customers,
Be the invisible girl who moved through the world without disturbing it. But something had broken inside her. Or maybe something had finally woken up. Because now the quiet felt suffocating instead of safe. The solitude felt lonely instead of peaceful. And every time she passed 4B's dark doorway, she felt the ghost of what might have been if they'd been different people in a different world. Mira noticed the change. "You're different," she said one evening over dinner at Alara's apartment.
sadder, yeah, but also, I don't know, more present somehow. I don't feel more present. I feel like I'm sleepwalking. No, before you were sleepwalking. Now you're awake, but everything hurts. Mira squeezed her hand. It'll get better. The pain will fade. You'll move on.
Would she? Could she move on from a man who'd kept her notes like treasures, who'd pulled her into his dangerous world to protect her, who'd broken her heart to save her life? Could she forget the way he'd looked at her in the darkness and let her see the human beneath the monster? That night, unable to sleep, Alara stood at her window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Dante was living his life, running his empire, being the feared boss everyone expected him to be.
Maybe he'd already forgotten about the florist who'd left him notes. Maybe she'd been exactly what he'd called her in the flower shop. Convenient, useful, easily discarded. Or maybe he was standing at his own window, looking out at the same city, remembering the woman who'd seen him as human when no one else did. The knock on her door came at 2 a.m. Alara jerked awake from a restless sleep on the couch, disoriented and frightened. No one knocked at 2 a.m. unless something was wrong. She approached the door cautiously, checking the peephole. Dante. He looked terrible, disheveled, exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a cut on his cheekbone that hadn't been there before. He was alone. No bodyguards, no Marco, just him standing in her hallway like a ghost that had finally found its way home. Alara opened the door. I know I shouldn't be here, Dante said without preamble. I know the plan was to stay away, to let you go back to your life. But I can't. He stopped, his control cracking. I need you to know that every word I said in that flower shop was a lie. Every cruel thing, every dismissal, every moment of that performance, none of it was real. I know. Alara's voice was steady even though her hands were shaking. You warned me. I knew it was strategy. Did you? Because I've spent 2 weeks replaying that scene in my mind, and all I can think about is the look on your face when I said I'd burned your notes. Like I'd destroyed something precious. Like I'd confirmed every fear you've ever had about not being worth keeping. You were protecting me. I was destroying you. Dante stepped closer, and she could see the pain etched in every line of his face. And the worst part is, I'd do it again. I'd say those things 1,000 times if it meant keeping you safe from Castellano, but I can't let you believe they were true. What happened to Russo? Alara asked, needing to ground this conversation in something concrete. He's gone. Permanently. Dante said it without elaboration, and Alara understood what gone meant in his world. The traitor's been eliminated, Castellano's lost interest in you, and you're safe. The plan worked perfectly.
Then why are you here?
Because I can't stop thinking about you. The confession came out raw. Because I kept your notes even though I told you I burned them. Because I sleep in the penthouse now instead of the Belmore. Because walking past your door and not knocking was killing me. Because... He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Because I was supposed to let you go and I can't do it. Alara's heart was racing. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the explanation she'd needed. But it wasn't enough. Not after everything they'd been through. You told me terrible things, Dante. You humiliated me in front of half the neighborhood. And I know it was strategy. I know it was necessary. But it still happened. Those words still existed. So before you ask me to forgive you, before you ask me to believe this is real, I need to know something. Anything. If you could do it over, if you could find another way to keep me safe that didn't involve breaking my heart in a flower shop, would you? Dante was quiet for a long moment. No. The answer was like a slap. Alara took a step back, but Dante caught her hand. Let me finish, he said urgently. I wouldn't change what I did because it worked, because you're alive and safe and free from my world. But I would change what came after. I wouldn't have stayed away for 2 weeks. I wouldn't have let you think for even a moment that those words were true. I would have come to you the same night, told you the plan had worked, held you while you processed what we'd done together. Why didn't you? Because Marco said it was safer to wait, to let the story settle, to make sure Castellano had completely lost interest before we had any contact. Dante's grip on her hand tightened. And because I'm a coward, because I was terrified that maybe you'd realize during those 2 weeks that you were better off without me. That the quiet florist and the mafia boss made sense in the middle of danger and adrenaline, but in the cold light of reality, we were just a disaster waiting to happen. Alara looked at this man who'd kept her notes, who'd protected her with cruelty, who stood in her doorway at 2 a.m. looking like he'd break if she turned him away. And she thought about the past 2 weeks, the hollow ache that had replaced her careful solitude, the way she'd felt more alive and awake during her time in his world than she had in years of safety. Come inside, she said quietly. Relief flooded Dante's face. He stepped into her small apartment, and Alara closed the door behind him, engaging the locks from habit. They stood in her tiny living space, this powerful crime boss looking utterly out of place among her plants and secondhand furniture and string lights. I kept them, Dante said, pulling something from his jacket. The notes. All of them, slightly worn now, arranged in the same chronological order she'd seen in his apartment. I could never burn these. They're the only proof I have that someone saw me as human. Alara took the stack of notes, her handwriting looking childish and naive in the dim light. You said you didn't want me in your world, that the plan was to send me back to my life. I lied. Or maybe I was lying to myself. Dante moved to the window, looking out at the view she'd stood at so many times. The truth is, I want you in my world. I want you in my life. But I also want you safe, and I don't know how to reconcile those two things. Maybe you don't have to reconcile them. Lara set the notes on her coffee table and joined him at the window. Maybe I get to decide what risks I'm willing to take. You don't understand the danger. I understand perfectly. She cut him off. I understand that being with you means living with security, with threats, with a world that operates by different rules. I understand that there will always be people who see me as leverage against you. I understand that loving you is the most dangerous thing I could do. Loving me? Dante repeated the words like they were foreign. Is that what this is? I don't know what else to call it. This thing where I can't stop thinking about you, where I feel more alive in your danger than I ever did in my safety, where the thought of going back to my quiet life without you feels like suffocation. Alara turned to face him fully. You kept my notes because they made you feel human. I left those notes because caring for you, even in that small way, made me feel real. So maybe we're both just lonely people who found each other. Or maybe it's more than that. It's more than that. Dante's hand came up to cup her face. It's so much more than that. You terrify me, Alara. Not because you're dangerous, but because you make me want things I've never let myself want. A life beyond survival. A future that isn't just waiting for the next threat. Someone who sees me, really sees me, and doesn't run. I'm not running. You should be. I know. She smiled despite everything. But I never was very good at doing what I should. Dante kissed her then, and it was different from the desperate passion in the penthouse or the strategic performance at the restaurant. This was honest. Real. Two people choosing each other despite every reason not to. When they finally broke apart, Alara rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. What happens now? I don't know. Dante's arms tightened around her. The smart thing would be to walk away, to let you have your safe life and keep my darkness far from you. But I'm tired of being smart. I'm tired of doing the strategic thing. I spent 2 weeks trying to convince myself that letting you go was right, and all I managed to do was prove that I'm miserable without you. So we try, Elara said. We figure out how to make this work, knowing all the complications, all the dangers, all the reasons it's impossible. And when it gets hard, when my world crashes into yours in ways you can't ignore, then we deal with it together. She looked up at him. That's what people do when they care about each other. They face the hard things together instead of alone. Dante laughed, but there was pain in it. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying and complicated and probably going to blow up in our faces. Elara took his hand, threading their fingers together. But I've spent my whole life choosing safe and simple, and it left me alone in a small apartment, talking to plants because they were less threatening than people. I don't want that anymore. I want messy and dangerous and real. I want you. Even knowing what I am, what I've done, especially knowing what you are, she said it firmly. Because I've seen you, Dante. Not just the crime boss everyone fears, but the man who keeps notes like treasures and fixes hallway lights and cares for dying ferns. That man is worth the risk. For the first time since she'd met him, Dante looked like he might cry. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're getting me anyway. Elara pulled him toward her couch. Now sit down and tell me what actually happened these past 2 weeks. Not the sanitized version, the truth. So Dante sat in her small apartment surrounded by her plants and her carefully constructed safe life. And he told her the truth. About confronting Russo, about the violence that had followed, about cleaning up the mess and securing his position and making sure Castellano understood that the Moretti family was untouchable. He didn't sanitize it or soften it or try to make himself look better than he was. And Elara listened, holding his hand, watching the exhaustion and pain play across his face, seeing the toll that his world took on him. It should have horrified her, should have confirmed all of Mira's warnings about the murder vampire across the hall. Instead, all she felt was a fierce protectiveness for this man who'd been forced to become a monster and was desperately trying to remember how to be human. Stay tonight, she said when he'd finished. Not because of strategy or plans or anything, except that I don't want you to leave. Dante looked at her small couch, her tiny apartment, the life she'd built around solitude. I don't belong here. Neither do I anymore. Elara stood, pulling him up with her. But we can figure out where we do belong, together. They ended up in her bed, not making love, but simply holding each other. Two lonely people who'd found something unexpected in the last place either of them had thought to look. Dante fell asleep first, his face smoothing out in rest, looking younger and more vulnerable than Elara had ever seen him. She stayed awake longer, watching him sleep, thinking about the path that had led her here. A few notes left for a lonely neighbor, a fern that needed watering, small acts of kindness that had somehow pulled her into a world she'd never imagined and changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow would bring complications. They'd have to figure out how to navigate a relationship between two completely different worlds. Dante would have to return to his empire, and Elara would have to face her friends and explain where she'd been, what she'd done, who she'd become. But tonight, in the darkness of her small apartment, they were just two people who'd chosen each other against all odds and all reason. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like enough. Morning brought reality crashing back with the insistence of sunlight through cheap curtains. Elara woke to find Dante already awake, watching her with an expression that was part wonder, part fear, like he still couldn't quite believe she was real. I have to go, he said quietly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. There's a meeting this morning. Territory negotiations with the families from the north side. Will you come back? The question came out more vulnerable than Elara intended. If you'll let me. Dante kissed her forehead, then her lips, soft and lingering. But we need to talk about what this looks like, what we look like. Because I can't keep you hidden, Elara. The moment I'm seen coming and going from this building, people will know. And once they know, you're back in the crosshairs. The fear that had briefly receded came flooding back. Even with Russo gone, even with Castellano backing off, Russo was one traitor. Castellano is one rival. Dante sat up,
his bare shoulders tense with the weight of what he was about to say. There will always be someone looking for leverage against me. Always someone who sees the people I care about as targets. That's the reality of my world. And if we do this, if we're actually together, you need to understand what you're agreeing to. Alara pulled the sheet around herself, processing this. What would that look like, practically speaking? Security. Constant security. Marco or someone like him always nearby. Your movements tracked, your routines monitored, your shop swept for bugs and cameras regularly. He turned to look at her. Your freedom traded for safety. Is that something you can live with? She should have said no, should have recognized that what he was describing wasn't a relationship but a gilded cage. But Alara thought about the past 2 weeks, the hollow ache of trying to return to her quiet life, the way everything had felt muted and gray without him. Can I still work at the flower shop? Dante's expression softened slightly. Yes, but with security present. Can I still see Mira? Have friends? Have a life beyond being your girlfriend? Yes, all of that. I don't want to own you, Alara. I just want to keep you alive. Then I can live with it. She reached for his hand. But I have conditions too. Such as? You don't get to make decisions about my safety without consulting me. You don't get to pull another flower shop scene without warning me first. And you don't get to disappear for 2 weeks because your security expert says it's safer. Alara held his gaze. I'm choosing this life, Dante. But I'm choosing it as your partner, not as someone you protect while keeping in the dark. Something fierce and possessive flashed in Dante's eyes. You have no idea how much I want to agree to that. But there may be times when I can't consult you, when the threat is immediate and the decision has to be made in seconds, not minutes, when keeping you in the dark is the only thing keeping you alive. He cupped her face in his hands. Can you trust me in those moments? Can you believe that even when I'm making choices without you, it's because I'm trying to protect what we have? It was a lot to ask. Trust, complete and absolute, in a man who'd already broken her heart once for strategic purposes. But Alara had seen the notes he'd kept, the vulnerability in his eyes when he'd admitted he couldn't let her go, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious in a world that had taught him nothing was sacred. I can try, she said finally, as long as you promise to try too, to include me when you can, to be honest when you can't, to remember that I'm stronger than I look. Deal. Dante pulled her close, and they stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the growing light. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the intimacy. He checked it and swore softly. I really do have to go. But Alara? Yeah? Tonight, dinner, somewhere public where people will see us together. No more hiding, no more pretending. If we're doing this, we do it honestly. After he left, Alara sat in her quiet apartment and tried to process what she'd just agreed to. A life of security and surveillance. A relationship that would put her in constant danger. A future so different from the safe, solitary existence she'd built that it might as well be a different planet. Her phone rang. Mira. Please tell me you're okay, Mira said without preamble. Please tell me you didn't do anything stupid last night. Alara looked at the rumpled sheets, at Dante's coffee cup still sitting on her counter, at the notes he'd returned now spread across her coffee table. Define stupid. Alara, no. Tell me the murder vampire wasn't at your apartment at 2 a.m. Tell me Mrs. Chen's text was wrong. His name is Dante. Oh my God, you're sleeping with him again, aren't you? After what he did? After he destroyed you in front of half the neighborhood? It's complicated, Mira. It's not complicated. He's a monster who used you and humiliated you, and you're just going back for more. Mira's voice was rising. Alara, I love you, but this is insane. This man is dangerous. I know he's dangerous. Then why? Because I love him. The words came out quiet, but certain. I know it's fast and crazy and probably the worst decision I've ever made, but I love him, Mira, and he loves me back in his own broken, complicated way. Silence on the other end. Then, does he make you happy? The question caught Alara off guard. Did Dante make her happy? Or did he make her feel alive, awake, real in a way she'd never experienced before? Were those the same thing? He makes me feel like I matter,
Alara said finally. Like I'm not invisible. Like my existence makes a difference to someone. You've always mattered, honey. You didn't need some criminal to tell you that. Maybe not, but I needed someone to show me. Alara took a breath. I know you're worried. I know this looks bad from the outside, but I'm asking you to trust me. To trust that I know what I'm doing, even when it doesn't make sense. Another long silence. If he hurts you again, I'm going to kill him myself. Security and guns and mafia connections be damned. Despite everything, Alara smiled. Deal. The day at the flower shop was strange. Sarah kept giving her concerned looks. Customers whispered when they thought she wasn't listening, and the whole neighborhood seemed to be waiting for Alara to either break down completely or provide more entertainment. She focused on her work, arranging bouquets, helping customers, tending to the plants that needed her attention. It wasn't until late afternoon that she noticed the man standing across the street, tall, professional, watching the shop with the kind of alertness that suggested he wasn't just a casual observer. Security, Alara realized. Dante had already put protection in place. The thought should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt oddly comforting. Like even when he wasn't physically present, Dante was making sure she was safe. Her phone buzzed with a text. Wear something nice. Picking you up at 7. D. Alara closed the shop early, ignoring Sarah's knowing look, and went home to prepare. She stood in front of her closet, realizing that most of her wardrobe consisted of comfortable work clothes and pajamas. Nothing appropriate for dinner with a crime boss. Another text. Marco's wife sent something to your apartment. Should be there now. Sure enough, when Alara checked her door, there was a garment bag hanging on the knob. Inside was a dress. Emerald green, elegant without being flashy, clearly expensive, but not ostentatious. It fit perfectly, and when Alara looked at herself in the mirror, she saw someone who could belong in Dante's world. Someone confident and put together instead of the shy florist who hid behind her plants. Dante arrived exactly at 7, and the look on his face when she opened the door made all of Alara's uncertainty worth it. You're beautiful, he said simply. You clean up pretty well yourself. And he did. Charcoal suit, white shirt open at the collar, hair styled back in a way that emphasized his sharp features. He looked every inch the powerful boss, except for the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. The restaurant was different from Aurelio's. Brighter, more open, the kind of place that catered to legitimate business dinners and anniversary celebrations. But Alara still recognized the calculating looks as they entered, still felt the weight of attention as Dante guided her to their table with his hand on the small of her back. They're staring, she murmured. Let them stare. Dante pulled out her chair, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with his dangerous reputation. Let them see that you're with me, that you chose to come back despite everything. Won't that make me a target again? You're already a target. You were a target the moment you left your first note. Dante settled into his own chair, his dark eyes serious. But this time, everyone will know what happens to people who threaten you. This time, there's no question about whether you matter to me. The waiter came and Dante ordered wine without consulting the menu, clearly familiar with this place. After the waiter left, Alara leaned forward. Tell me the truth. How bad is the gossip? What are people saying? That I'm a fool for taking you back? That you're either incredibly forgiving or incredibly stupid? That our relationship is either the most romantic thing they've ever seen or a disaster waiting to happen? Dante's lips curved slightly. Take your pick. What do you think it is? All of the above. He reached across the table for her hand. I think I'm a fool for dragging you into this. I think you're brave for choosing it anyway. And I think we're probably going to crash and burn spectacularly, but I can't bring myself to care because the alternative is living without you. And I've tried that. It doesn't work. Their food came, and they ate while Dante pointed out the various people in the restaurant. Which ones were legitimate business people? Which ones were connected to the families? Which ones were just wealthy civilians who had no idea they were dining alongside organized crime? It was surreal, this glimpse into his world, seeing how the dangerous and the mundane existed side by side. They were finishing dessert when Victor Castellano walked in. Alara felt Dante tense beside her, his entire body shifting into combat readiness, even though his expression remained pleasant. Castellano spotted them immediately, and to Alara's horror, started walking toward their table. "Be calm," Dante murmured. "Let me handle this."
"Dante," Castellano said, arriving at their table with that same smooth charm that had set Alara on edge before. "And the lovely Alara. I heard you two had reconciled. How romantic." "Victor," Dante's voice was cold. "We're having a private dinner." Of course. I won't intrude." But Castellano didn't leave. Instead, he looked directly at Alara. "I wanted to apologize, actually, for any distress my people may have caused you. The inquiries at your building were overzealous."
"A misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that nearly got her killed," Dante said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "But she wasn't killed. She's here, safe and sound, having dinner with you." Castellano's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm glad we could clear up the confusion. I'd hate for there to be any lingering bad blood between our families over such a small matter." The subtext was clear. Castellano was offering peace, acknowledging that pursuing Alara had been a mistake, backing off in exchange for Dante not retaliating for the threat. Dante studied him for a long moment. "Consider the matter settled. But Victor, if your people so much as look at her wrong, if they breathe in her direction, if they even think about using her against me, the understanding between our families ends, permanently." "Understood." Castellano nodded to Alara. "Enjoy your evening." After he left, Alara released the breath she'd been holding. That was a peace offering. Dante's jaw was tight. He's smart enough to know that going after you again would start a war he doesn't want. But he's also reminding me that he knows where you are, what you mean to me. It's a threat wrapped in diplomacy. Will there be others, other people trying to use me as leverage? Probably. Dante signaled for the check. That's why the security. That's why I need you to be careful, to trust the people I assign to protect you, to understand that this life comes with constant vigilance. They left the restaurant and drove back to the Belmore in Dante's car. Alara watched the city pass by the windows, thinking about Castellano's veiled threat, about the constant danger that would now be part of her existence, about all the ways this could go wrong. "Take me to your apartment," she said suddenly. "The one at the Belmore. I want to see it again." Dante glanced at her but didn't argue. They parked and rode the elevator up to the 4th floor, walking down the familiar hallway past Mrs. Chen's door and the Garcia twins' apartment, and finally arriving at 4B. The apartment looked exactly as Alara remembered it. The books, the comfortable furniture, the careful evidence of a man trying to create something like normalcy. But there was one difference. On the coffee table, in the exact same arrangement she'd seen before, were her notes. "You brought them back here," she said softly. "This is where they belong, where you first left them, where I first kept them." Dante stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "This is the place where we started, Alara, before the danger and the plans and the breakup. Just a florist and her neighbor, connecting through notes about ferns and umbrellas." Alara turned in his arms. "Can we go back to that? To something simple?" "No." Dante was honest, at least. "We can't go back. We can only go forward. But maybe we can build something new, something that acknowledges what we are. You with your flowers and kindness, me with my empire and violence, and finds a way to make those two things coexist. How? I don't know yet, but I have some ideas." He guided her to the couch, the same one where he'd first told her the truth about who he was. "I've been thinking about the future, about what happens when the immediate danger passes and we're left trying to build an actual life together. And I think I'm tired of just surviving, tired of running an empire built on things that keep me awake at night." Dante took her hands in his. "I've been talking to my lawyers, to my financial advisors. The Moretti family has legitimate business interests, the shipping companies, the warehouses, the distribution networks. What if we started shifting focus, phasing out the illegal operations, building up the legitimate ones?" Alara stared at him. "You're talking about going straight?" "I'm talking about finding a middle ground. I'll never be completely clean. There's too much history, too many obligations, too many people who depend on the family's power. But maybe I don't have to be the monster I've been. Maybe I can be something else." He looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Maybe I can be the man you see when you look at me, the one who deserves the notes you left, the kindness you showed, the love you're offering. Dante, I know it won't be fast. I know it won't be easy, but I need you to know I'm trying. That being with you makes me want to be better than what I am. His voice roughened with emotion. You make me want to be human again, Ilara, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to deserve that. Ilara felt tears gathering in her eyes. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest, to let me in, to stop trying to protect me from every hard truth. Even when those truths are ugly? Especially then. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. I fell in love with you knowing what you were. I'm not going to run when you show me the reality of that. They sat like that for a long moment, two people from completely different worlds trying to figure out how to build a bridge between them. Then Dante stood, pulling Ilara up with him. Come with me. I want to show you something. He led her to the bedroom, but instead of the bed, he went to the closet and pulled out a box. Inside were more notes, not just the ones Ilara had written, but new ones. Notes in Dante's sharp handwriting, dozens of them, all addressed to her. I started writing these during the 2 weeks we were apart, he said quietly. Things I wanted to tell you but couldn't. Apologies for the flower shop, explanations for my choices, promises I knew I couldn't keep but wanted to make anyway. He handed her the box. I thought about leaving them at your door, the way you left notes for me. But I was afraid you wouldn't want to hear from me, that I'd destroyed whatever we had too completely to repair. Ilara pulled out a note at random and read, I'm sorry. I know those words aren't enough, but they're all I have. I'm sorry for the things I said, for the way I hurt you, for using your kindness as a weapon in a war you never signed up for. If I could take it back, if I could find another way, I would. But I can't. All I can do is promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the notes you left me. D. She read another. You were right about the loneliness. I've been alone so long I forgot what connection felt like. Now that I remember, now that I've experienced what it's like to be seen as human, I don't know how to go back to the isolation. You broke something in me, Ilara. Or maybe you fixed something that had been broken so long I'd stopped noticing. Either way, I'm changed, and I'm terrified. D. And another. I kept your notes because they were proof that kindness still existed in my world. Now I'm writing notes to you because I need to believe that redemption is possible. That a man who's done terrible things can still become someone better. That the monster can remember how to be human. You make me want to believe that. D. There were dozens more, each one a window into Dante's thoughts during their separation, each one raw and honest and absolutely real. Ilara read through them with tears streaming down her face, understanding for the first time just how much those 2 weeks had cost him, too. You kept writing to me, she whispered, even when you thought I'd never read them. I had to. It was the only thing keeping me sane. Dante pulled her close. You left notes for a neighbor you barely knew because you saw someone who needed kindness. I wrote notes I thought I'd never deliver because writing to you made me feel less alone. We're both lonely people reaching out through paper and ink, Ilara. We've been doing this dance since the beginning. Then let's stop dancing around it. Ilara set down the box and took Dante's face in her hands. Let's be together, really together. Not hiding, not pretending, not protecting each other from the truth. Just two people who found each other and decided they're worth the risk. Even knowing what it costs, what you're giving up? I'm not giving up anything that matters. The quiet life I built, the safety I hid behind, that wasn't living. It was just existing. She kissed him softly. You make me feel alive, Dante. Even when it's terrifying, even when it's dangerous, you make me feel like I matter. You do matter. You matter more than anything. They made love then, not with the desperate passion of their first night or the strategic performance of their public relationship, but with the honest intimacy of two people who'd finally stopped hiding from each other. Afterward, lying tangled together in Dante's bed, Ilara felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that this was right, despite all the reasons it was wrong. Move in with me, Dante said suddenly. Ilara pulled back to look at him. Here? In the Belmore? Here. Or the penthouse. Or somewhere completely new that's ours together. He brushed hair from her face. I'm tired of living in two separate worlds. I want to come home to you. I want to fall asleep beside you and wake up with you every morning. I want to build something real with you. That's fast. We've been doing everything fast. Why stop now? But his expression was serious. I understand if you need time. If you want to... Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll move in with you. Alara smiled at his surprise. You're right. We've been doing everything fast. And it's terrifying and probably stupid and definitely not what anyone would advise. But I don't care. I want to be with you, Dante, completely. No more separation, no more hiding, just us. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. Alara gave notice on her apartment at the Belmore, though Dante convinced her to keep it, to have a place that was purely hers if she ever needed space. She moved most of her things to the penthouse, her plants, her books, her small collection of treasures that made a space feel like home. The succulent Dante had given her found a place on the windowsill, thriving under her care. The flower shop remained her sanctuary. She worked her regular hours, though now with Marco or one of his team always present. The security felt intrusive at first, but gradually Alara got used to having a professional shadow. Marco was good at his job, present enough to be protective, but unobtrusive enough that customers barely noticed him. Mira took longer to accept the relationship. She visited the penthouse once, looked around at the expensive furniture and the city view and the clear evidence of Dante's wealth and power, and pulled Alara aside. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. Really sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He destroyed you in public, Alara, in front of everyone. How do you just forgive that? Because I know why he did it. And because he spent every day since trying to make it right. Alara took her friend's hands. I know this looks crazy from the outside. I know you're worried, but I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing. Do you? Know what you're doing? No. Alara smiled slightly. But I'm doing it anyway, because being with him, even with all the complications and danger, feels more right than the safe life I had before. Mira studied her for a long moment, then sighed. You're different. Happier, I think. More present. I feel more present. Like I'm actually living instead of just going through the motions. Okay. Mira pulled her into a hug. But if he hurts you again, I'm serious about the killing him thing, mafia boss or not. Dante, for his part, was making good on his promise to change. Alara watched him slowly, carefully begin to shift the Moretti family's operations. It wasn't dramatic. He couldn't just walk away from decades of history and obligation, but he started declining certain deals, redirecting resources toward legitimate businesses, building a foundation for a future that didn't depend entirely on illegal operations. It'll take years, he told Alara one night as they stood at the penthouse windows looking out at the city, maybe decades, and I'll never be completely clean. There's too much history, too many people who depend on the family's protection, but I can try to be better than I was. That's all anyone can do. Alara leaned against him. Try to be better. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's worth it. She turned in his arms. You're worth it. The threats didn't disappear entirely. There were still moments of danger, still times when security had to be tightened or Alara had to change her routine because of credible concerns. But Dante kept his promise. He consulted her, included her, let her make informed decisions about her own safety instead of just imposing his will. And slowly, day by day, they built something real. Not the fantasy Alara had imagined when she first started leaving notes, and not the strategic partnership they'd performed for Castellano's benefit. Something honest and complicated and absolutely theirs. 6 months after that night in the flower shop, Alara returned to the Belmore to pick up some things she'd stored in her old apartment. The hallway looked exactly the same. The faded carpet, the flickering lights, the familiar doors. But when she reached the 4th floor, she noticed something different. The fern was thriving. The scraggly plant in the chipped pot had been replaced with a new one, lush and green and clearly well-tended. And beside it was a note in Dante's handwriting. For the woman who taught me that small kindnesses matter. Thank you for watering the plants. Thank you for seeing the human beneath the monster. Thank you for leaving notes that changed my life. D. Alara felt tears prick her eyes. She pulled out her phone and called Dante. "I found your note," she said when he answered. "I was hoping you would." She could hear the smile in his voice. "I've been taking care of it every Wednesday, just like you used to. Seemed wrong to let it die after everything it represents." "What does it represent?" "The beginning. The moment you decided a lonely neighbor needed some kindness. The moment everything changed." A pause. "I love you, Alara. I don't say it enough, but I do. You saved me from a life of isolation and violence and convinced me I could be something more than what I was." "I love you too." Alara traced the letters of his note with her finger. "And you didn't need saving, Dante. You just needed someone to remind you that you were worth caring about." Same thing, isn't it? Maybe it was. Maybe love was always about reminding each other that you mattered, that you were seen, that you were worth the effort of reaching across the distance. Maybe it was about small gestures and quiet moments, and the accumulation of kindnesses that built something stronger than any empire. Alara took Dante's new note and added it to the collection she kept in her nightstand. Both his notes and hers, the original ones and the new ones they'd started leaving for each other around the penthouse. Little reminders that they'd chosen each other, that they kept choosing each other, even when it was hard. That evening, Dante came home early. Alara heard him before she saw him, his key in the lock, his footsteps in the entryway. She met him in the living room, and he pulled her close without a word, just holding her in the golden light of sunset. "Rough day?" she asked. "Long day. Better now." He kissed the top of her head. "I talked to my lawyers about the foundation. They'd been discussing it for months, a foundation that would use the Moretti family's resources to help people who'd been caught up in the cycles of poverty and crime that the families often exploited. Education programs, job training, support for people trying to leave dangerous situations. A way to build something good from the empire of questionable morality. And they think it's viable. We can start small, build it up over time." Dante pulled back to look at her. "It was your idea. You should be part of it. Help decide where the money goes, which programs to support." "I'm a florist, Dante. I don't know anything about running a foundation." "You know about kindness, about seeing people who need help and actually helping them, instead of exploiting their vulnerability." His hands framed her face. "You know about leaving notes for lonely neighbors and watering dying plants, and all the small ways people can make each other's lives better. That's exactly what we need." Alara thought about it, about taking the empire built on darkness and using it to create light, about transforming the Moretti family legacy from something feared to something that actually helped people. It wouldn't erase the past, wouldn't make Dante's history disappear, but it would be a step toward the future they were trying to build. "Okay," she said, "let's do it." The foundation launched 6 months later. They called it the Belmore Initiative, named after the building where they'd first met, where a lonely florist had left notes for an even lonelier crime boss. It started small: scholarships for kids in underserved neighborhoods, job programs for people with records who couldn't get hired elsewhere, support services for families affected by violence. Alara threw herself into the work with the same quiet dedication she'd brought to her flower shop. She visited the neighborhoods the foundation served, talked to the people they were trying to help, made sure the money went where it would actually make a difference. And slowly, the Moretti name started to mean something different. Not just fear and power, but also hope and opportunity. Dante watched her work with an expression of constant amazement, like he still couldn't quite believe this woman had chosen him, like he was waiting for her to realize what she'd gotten herself into and walk away. But Alara never walked away. Through the foundation work and the security scares and the complicated navigation of 2 very different worlds, she stayed. Because love, she'd learned, wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth fighting for and choosing them every single day. 1 year after the flower shop breakup, Dante took Alara back to Petal and Stem. She hadn't been back since that terrible day, the memory still too raw. But he'd made arrangements with Sarah, who'd agreed to close early and leave them alone. "Why are we here?" Alara asked as they stood among the flowers she used to tend. "Because this is where I broke your heart." Dante took her hands. "And I need to replace that memory with something better." He dropped to one knee. Alara's breath caught. "This couldn't be. He wasn't—" "I know we've done everything backward," Dante said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "We fell in love before we even really met. We survived danger before we went on a proper date. We moved in together before we figured out how to navigate our differences, but I want to do this one thing right." He opened the box, revealing a ring, simple, elegant, with a stone the color of the emerald dress she'd worn to their first public dinner.
Elara Wynne, you left notes for a lonely neighbor and changed his entire life. You looked at a monster and saw a human being. You chose danger over safety, truth over comfort, love over every logical reason not to.
Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the kindness you showed me?" Elara looked at this man who'd kept her notes like treasures, who was slowly transforming his empire to honor the values she'd taught him, who'd given her a life so much bigger and more real than the quiet existence she'd been hiding in.
"Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, of course, yes." Dante slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that felt like a promise, like a new beginning, like everything they'd survived together had been leading to this moment. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the Belmore, not in the building itself, that would have been too strange, but in the small courtyard garden that Elara had slowly transformed with the owner's permission. She'd planted flowers there, installed benches, created a small oasis of beauty in the middle of the urban landscape. Mira was her maid of honor, still slightly suspicious of Dante, but unable to deny that Elara was happier than she'd ever seen her. Marco stood as Dante's best man, the professional security chief looking uncomfortable in his formal suit, but genuinely pleased for his boss. The guest list was small, a handful of Elara's friends, some of Dante's most trusted associates, the neighbors from the Belmore who'd watched their strange romance unfold. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire ceremony. The Garcia twins provided enthusiastic applause at all the wrong moments. And when the officiant pronounced them married, when Dante kissed his bride in the garden she'd created from nothing, Elara thought about how far they'd both come.
From lonely neighbors leaving notes across a hallway to partners building a life together. From isolation to connection. From hiding to being fully, completely seen. The reception was held at the penthouse, and as the party wound down and guests started leaving, Elara found herself standing at the window with Dante, looking out at the city that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Dante asked quietly. "The quiet life you gave up? The safety you traded for this?" Elara thought about her small apartment, her solitary routines, the carefully maintained walls she'd built around her heart. Then she thought about the foundation they'd built, the lives they were changing, the love they'd fought for against impossible odds. "Never," she said, "not for a single moment. Even when it's hard? Even when the danger feels too real? Especially then." She turned to face him, "Because the alternative is living half a life. And I did that for too long before I met you." Dante pulled her close, and they swayed to the distant music, the last guests forgotten. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For leaving notes, for watering a dying fern, for seeing something worth saving in a man who'd convinced himself he was beyond redemption." "You saved yourself, Dante. I just reminded you it was possible." "No." He pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes intense. "You saved me, Elara. Completely and absolutely. You took a lonely man living in the shadows and gave him a reason to step into the light. That's not just a reminder, that's salvation." Years later, when people asked how they met, Elara and Dante would smile at each other across whatever table they were sitting at and say they were neighbors. Just neighbors who'd connected over a dying fern and some kind notes left under a door. They never told the full story, the danger, the breakup, the violence that had brought them together and nearly torn them apart. Some things were private, sacred, meant only for the two people who'd lived through them. But in the penthouse that still served as their home, in the foundation offices where they worked to build something good from Dante's legacy, in the small moments of quiet connection that defined their life together, the evidence of their journey remained. The notes, carefully preserved in a special box. The fern from the hallway, still thriving under their joint care. The succulent Dante had given Elara, now surrounded by dozens of other plants she'd collected over the years. Small reminders of how they'd started, of the kindnesses that had built a bridge between two impossible worlds. The Belmore initiative grew, helping hundreds and then thousands of people escape the cycles of poverty and violence that the families had once exploited. Dante slowly, carefully transformed the Moretti Empire into something his wife could be proud of. Never entirely legitimate, but so much better than it had been. Better than he had been. And Alara, the shy florist who'd once hidden from the world behind her plants and her quiet routines, became a force in her own right, an advocate for the people the foundation served, a voice for those who'd been invisible the way she'd once been invisible. They built a life together that honored both of their truths, Dante's complicated past and Alara's gentle strength, his power and her kindness, his darkness and her light. And somehow, impossibly, those contradictions fit together into something beautiful. On their 10th anniversary, Dante came home to find notes scattered throughout the penthouse. The same kind of notes Alara used to leave at 4B, small observations and kindnesses written in her familiar handwriting. The fern in the living room is looking sad. I think it needs more light. I saw you left your coffee cup in the study. I moved it before it could stain the desk. Thank you for loving me the way you do, for letting me see you, for choosing me every single day. He found her in their bedroom, surrounded by the original notes they'd both written. The evidence of their beginning spread across the bed. What's all this? He asked. A reminder. Alara smiled at him. That we started with small kindnesses and built something extraordinary. That love doesn't have to be loud or dramatic or perfect to be real. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave a note for a lonely neighbor and trust that it matters. Dante gathered up the notes, both old and new, and pulled his wife close. It mattered. You mattered. You still matter. You'll always matter. They stood there in the golden light of late afternoon, two people who'd found each other across a hallway and refused to let go, even when everything said they should. Two lonely souls who'd transformed their isolation into connection, their fear into courage, their separate lives into a shared journey. The florist and the crime boss, the woman who watered dying plants, and the man who'd convinced himself he was beyond saving. The most unlikely love story, built from notes and ferns and small acts of kindness that had changed everything. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.